In the 1980s, Japan's rapid economic growth threatened the hegemony of the United States. So at the G7 meeting, the United States asked Japan to make a compromise. And finally, Japan was forced to sign the Plaza Agreement. After that, Japan's economy stagnated for decades. The United States has ruthlessly suppressed Japan and Germany, who are ever second only to it in economy. In order to maintain its monopoly advantages in high-tech, the United States has used illegal means such long-arm jurisdiction to encircle its competitors in the high-tech field. A number of multinational enterprises, such as Toshiba of Japan, Alstom of France, and Siemens of Germany, have a deep understanding of its tactics. The G7 begins to infiltrate into not only the economic and financial fields, but also the international political and security fields. Its purpose is to put aside the multilateral mechanism of the United Nations and vigorously implement the so-called rules of the G7. At the end of last century, NATO, led by the United States, bypassed by the UN Security Council and adopted unilateralism to launch the Kosovo War, the military expenditure of which was shared through a G7 meeting. While NATO's eastward expansion and other measures continue to squeeze Russia's strategic space, the G7 has implemented many rounds of sanctions against Russia on the pretext of the Ukraine issue and the so-called Russian support for the Syrian government's use of chemical weapons. In addition to waging wars and sanctions, the G7 has constantly interfered in the internal affairs of other countries. Drawing lines by different ideology, the G7 finance ministers meeting held in early June grossly interfered in China's internal affairs on issues related to Xinjiang, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Advocating the so-called safeguarding democracy and protecting human rights, the joint statement issued after the meeting stressed the so-called international rules and wantonly desecrated China. The G7 seeks only private interests for its own small circle and small group. However, each member of the group has its own small calculation. In order to maintain its dominant position in the Western development economies, the United States has tried its best to suppress others, taking American first as the premise and showing selfishness and hegemony with no shame. It is against the trend of the times for the G7 to draw lines with ideology, to engage in group policies and small circles to specific countries, or to engage in selective pseudo-multilateralism, which are unpopular and will not succeed.